Ukrainian border guards from the strike drone company. The Aquila unit of the Stalevi Brigade and Cordon detected Russian troop positions and equipment in the northern Slobozhansky direction. Using strike drones, Ukrainian pilots managed to hit a cannon, an enemy vehicle on the move, 2 shelters, 3 antennas, and a field ammunition depot. The 41st Separate Mechanized Brigade showed how the clearing operation in Kupiansk is carried out. During reconnaissance in a residential area, Ukrainian defenders found 2 invaders who were hiding in a house and apparently were trying to wait it out there. When the Ukrainian armed forces soldiers offered the Russian occupiers a chance to surrender, the occupiers responded with small arms fire and were eliminated.
Very important combat operations are taking place in Kupiansk, considering all the circumstances we've discussed. Well, first of all, Kupiansk-Uzlovy is south of the main Kupiansk, and the enemy is trying to somehow justify the situation around Kupiansk, which they've claimed to have taken several times already. If they can't take the main Kupiansk, moreover, there were 3 locations where they held positions, and the Ukrainian Defense Forces managed to reduce them to just 1, basically a few high-rises with fewer than 50 people. Enemy soldiers are still trying to survive somehow, but their prospects are about the same as the first ones. 2 locations have already been effectively destroyed.
Operators of unmanned systems struck a Russian OSA surface-to-air missile system. Pilots from the 412th Separate Nemesis Unmanned Systems Brigade delivered a precise strike on the enemy's mobile air defense system, which was being used to cover Russian armed forces units and key facilities. This strike targeted aviation, cruise missiles, and drones. Meanwhile, in the Konstantinovka direction, the invaders carried out assault operations near Stepanivka, Rusnovayar, Plashevka, Sherbinovka, and Sofievka. In the Pokrovsk area, Russian occupiers tried to push Ukrainian soldiers from their positions in the area of Radynske, Novoalexandrovka, Novopavlivka, Kotlin, and Novopidhorodne. And on the Huliaipol section of a front, there were clashes near Dobropilya, Preluhi, Starokrainka, and Sviatopetrivka. In addition, Ukrainian defense forces cleared the eastern part of the village of Hyshinin in Donetsk region of Russian invaders. This was reported by soldiers of the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. They also shared footage of drones targeting Russian positions. Russian troops continue to put pressure on the village, which is located northwest of Pokrovska. Units of the aggressor country's army are using several routes of advance, operating in small assault groups. But Ukrainian defenders are successfully detecting and destroying them.
They plan to quickly capture Pokrovsk-Mirnograd and break into the defenses of Dnipropetrovsk region. In other words, to keep moving further west. Right now, none of that is happening. And that's not happening, in particular because Russian troops are bogged down in fighting directly for Pokrovska. It's happening because they're taking losses. They're forced to bring in reserves, forced to re-equip their own troops. So what does that mean? It means they can't build up the pace of their operation directly in the Zaporizhia direction. And they can't speed up their advances into the Dnipropetrovsk region. Furthermore, we see that the Ukrainian defense is highly proactive, and at any moment that opportunities arise, our troops are actually pushing the enemy back.
From February 11th to 15th, Ukrainian forces liberated more than 200 square kilometers of territory from Russian troops. This is the highest figure in 2.5 years of fighting. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War link these successes to a breakdown in communication between the Russian Army Command and the front line. This is due to the Russians' restricted access to the Starlink system. Ukrainian forces used counterattacks to expand control over liberated areas and weaken enemy positions. And in the past day alone, Ukraine's defense forces eliminated 740 Russian invaders. Russia's total combat losses since the start of the full-scale invasion have already exceeded 1,256,000 military personnel. Also, in the past day, 3 Russian tanks, 6 armored fighting vehicles, and 4 artillery systems, air defense assets, and nearly 200 units of enemy vehicles were destroyed.
So let's continue discussing the situation at the front. Our guest is already joining us. Pavel Likacek, head of military programs at the Center for Global Studies Strategy 21. Hello, Pavel.
Good morning. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.
Glory to the heroes. I'd like to start with this. A course with Dobropilya. The fighters of the 33rd and 1st Separate Assault Regiments repelled an attempt. They stopped an attempt by Russian troops to break through in the village of Dobropilya, Zaporizhia region. This was reported by the unit on Facebook. They say the occupiers advanced in a truck, intending to gain a foothold and begin storming the settlement. Ukrainian units responded quickly to the threat, and as a result, the attack was repelled. The enemy suffered losses, and Dobropilya remains under the control of Ukraine's defense forces overall. How do you assess the situation in the Zaporizhia direction?
If we're talking specifically about Dobropilya, to be honest, we have to admit that the enemy mostly controls Dobropilya. Currently, the northern and western parts of the town of Dobropilya are firmly under our control. It's hard to say how the situation there will develop. On one hand, the enemy forces are steadily pushing forward. On the other hand, Ukraine's defense forces stationed throughout this specific area, north of Dobropilya, in the sector from Pokrovsky to Dobropilya, are currently in the process of carrying out a series of counterattacks. They're pushing in about 10 to 15 kilometers deep. These are incredibly significant counterstrikes positioned directly at the junction of three Russian armies. And essentially, what we are seeing, one of them, the 36th Army, is in a really tough spot. So, whether the Russians have or will keep the potential to keep advancing, not just in the Holyopol direction, but in the south overall, is a big question mark. On top of that, you can add the counterattacks by the defense forces in the Zaporizhia direction. Over in the western sector, on the Pridniprov section of the front, just west of our Oriki fortified area, these actions are also significantly disrupting and undermining the comprehensive strategic plan of the enemy's offensive operation on the southern front.
Since we started talking about different directions, my colleague asked you about Dobropilya, so I'll ask about the Lyman direction, where heavy fighting is still ongoing. But Russian forces are unable to break through Ukraine's defenses, according to Viktor Trahubov, a representative of the joint forces, speaking on the national marathon Yedini Novini. Control over this area is important for the enemy because it opens the way to the northern districts of Donetsk region. Russian troops are only fighting in neighboring villages, actively deploying their personnel. A large gray zone has formed on the front, but Ukrainian units are holding their positions. They are not allowing the enemy to advance. Well, Pavel, that was a brief quote from Victor. Let's expand a bit on that comment. Please take a look at the Lyman direction for us and our viewers.
The Lyman direction can't be considered separately from the Donetsk front as a whole. On one hand, the Russians are now trying to, by successfully breaking through our fierce resistance at the key cities of Pokrovsk and Myrnohad, which are still currently holding out, and effectively preventing the enemy from getting behind our major fortified area in the Donbas region, meaning the vital hubs of Kostiantynivka, Drushkivka, and Kramatorsk. Furthermore, in the southern sector, they aim to repeat that same unfortunate Dobropilya false start once again, attempting to bypass our defensive lines entirely. They are currently moving in from the south directly toward our rear positions. At the same time, in order to cut off our group of forces, their objective is to attempt to break through in the Lyman direction from north to south, from northwest to southeast, then reach Sloviansk, or even completely encircle the city of Sloviansk. That's their plan, but as we can see, not in the south. They have not been successful in their attempts to achieve their goals in the north either. They're essentially banging their heads against a solid brick wall, especially in the Lyman direction, so it is quite obvious what comes next. We expect that the total number of intense combat clashes and persistent Russian attempts to break through our defensive lines in the Lyman direction will significantly increase over the coming weeks, and this difficult situation may even continue for several months. And it will be tied directly and proportionally to the overall level of success achieved by the Russian military forces within the strategically critical southern sectors of the ongoing front lines across the Donbass region. Maybe it'll all end with them not being able to achieve their goals. They won't be able to successfully execute their strategic objectives and will try to persist with their offensive in Donbass in the most difficult way by frontal attempts, frontal filtering, infiltration, and relentlessly pushing through our front lines. In a very similar fashion to what they did in the Seversk direction just a short while ago, now they're trying to execute this exact same maneuver near Kostiantinivka.
Regarding what's happening in the Donetsk direction, Ukraine's defense forces have cleared the eastern part of the village of Hryshine in Donetsk region of Russian occupiers. This was reported by soldiers of the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces. They also shared footage of drones targeting Russian positions. Russian troops continue to put pressure on the village, of course, which is located northwest of Pokrovsk. Units of the aggressor country's army are using several routes of advance, operating in small assault groups. But Ukrainian defenders are successfully detecting and destroying them. And as we can see, Putin isn't managing to conquer, so to speak, the entire Donetsk region, which he claims, and the deadlines, as they say, keep getting pushed back. How do you assess the situation there? And actually, why are they still advancing in small groups?
So to speak, why do enemy troops keep moving forward, or at least trying to? Is it because they don't have enough forces, or are the current weather conditions dictating certain limitations?
Because the defense forces are holding. They're desperately defending the front and this critically important strategic area by utilizing every single available means and resource at their disposal. Honestly, it's directly related to. Here's what's happening. It's a continuation of the intense fighting in the Pokrovsk and Myrnorad directions. From the south, the Second Army is steadily advancing. In fact, it has now captured Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. The fighting remains sporadic and ongoing. On the northern outskirts, basically, of Myrnograd and Pokrovsk. At the same time, the Russians are trying to break through and split this defense. Further north, actually, toward Hryshine, one of the routes out. It's an attempt to push further at the same time as the 51st Army from the north, which is grabbing and trying to encircle Pokrovsky, Skvernograd. They've encountered significant resistance at Rodinske, where intense and heavy combat is currently also taking place. The simple reality that the Russian armies are currently heavily pinned down in this sector effectively prevents them from carrying out their plan. Their primary objective was to outflank our entire group by advancing from the south, specifically moving through the regions of Kostiantinivka and Dobropilya in a calculated attempt to strike directly at our forces' rear positions. However, that same 7th Corps and 3rd Corps had already managed, several weeks or even a few months ago, to successfully crush the enemy's initial breakthrough attempt and prevent them from infiltrating deep into our rear lines. In the area north of Pokrovsk-Mirnograd. But to finish off that claw of the 51st Army, which is trying to encircle Pokrovsk-Mirnograd from the north, we simply did not have the necessary available resources or strategic reserves. This is exactly the reason why the fighting around Pokrovsk-Mirnograd will likely persist for some time, but whether the enemy can actually keep advancing with such heavy losses remains a very significant and open question. Both in manpower and equipment, well, it's highly doubtful.
And one last question, just a minute literally. We informed our viewers that Russia decided to mark the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by putting up tricolor flags in rear occupied Ukrainian settlements. Why are they doing this? It's just for show, Pavel, literally just a minute.
It's all for show, just for the cameras. For the cameras, there. In the tundra in Russia, they'll be watching. They're convinced that Russia is winning, getting death notices and believing that Russia is right to seize someone else's land. That's clear. What's much worse is that Russia can't even celebrate. In quotes, they'll mark this holiday with another round of missile and drone strikes on Ukraine. That's a warning to us. Be ready. Hang in there.